Hello and welcome to this quick guide of the fuel calculator. So what we've got 4 tabs: the performance model, strategy model for when you're doing a lap race, strategy model for when you're in a time-based race, and a track database. What I'll do first is I'll just show you the end result and then we'll work a little bit backwards because it might seem a bit overwhelming. There's a lot of information here, but what I've tried to do is summarize it so that basically from your point of view, you're just putting in 2 or 3 bits of information and all that complexity and all the what ifs are calculated for you. So let's look at this race scenario. We have a race coming up and it's a lap based race. We've got 120 laps to do. So put 120 in. Then the next thing to fill in is the fuel safety margin. So at the moment that's on 0. So there is no margin for error at all. So my recommendation is always to add something, and what I've done here is I've done that in terms of laps, because sometimes you'll be at a longer track or a shorter track, so if you do it in kind of litres or weight or such like it might be a little bit more confusing. So what I've done here is to do it into laps, and my recommendation is to put 1 lap's worth of fuel in. So what this means is you'll be never less than 1 lap of fuel away. So even if everything goes wrong, you've still got a lap's worth of fuel to get you home. And what we've got here is the starting amount of fuel. So this is the amount of fuel that the car will leave the pits with. So every time it comes into the pit, it's going to be filled to 90 litres. So that's the capacity of our tank. And so we're just going to start there and see, okay, that's the default. We're going to brim it and keep on filling it up every time it comes in. What does that look like? And can we make that better? Then 4th and final thing to choose, that's all there is your performance model. And I'll explain those in a minute, but you've got 4 to choose from. You can call them what you want. I've called mine fast drive fuel save, which is when you're lifting, coasting and trying to save a bit of fuel, a wet one and a safety car one. I'll explain those in a bit, but basically you just need to choose one that means something to you and then you're ready to go. So there's loads of stuff on here. Just have a look at the top right, your scenario plan. That's the first thing you need to do, and that sort of summarizes everything that you really need to know. In actual fact, once you've done all this kind of what ifs and such like, that little segment there, that little chart is really all you need, and you can just take a screenshot of that, print that out, and you really don't need to worry about the rest of it. So what this is telling us is that if for a 120 lap race with a 1 lap fuel margin, putting in 90 litres of fuel every time the car leaves the pits, we would need 2 stops to get to the end. Based on this performance model, this, how much fuel we're using, it will take 3 hours, 14 minutes and 54 seconds. So quite a long time. And yeah, so we've got the starting amount is 90 litres and the refill is 88.2. Now why that is different is because you're driving around and you'll be coming in before you've used all your 90 litres. So therefore to get back to 90 litres, you don't need to add quite as much. And that kind of works it all out for you. So when you come in, it's recommended you come in on lap 49 and on lap 98. So they're your 2 stops. And if you do that, you'll be able to get through the race and you'll be absolutely fine. So that's the starting point. But if you look at the end here, this tells you how much fuel is left at the end of your race. And you can see there's a lot of fuel in there. So this is fuel in litres. So apologies to my American friends who like gallons. 50 litres is still quite a lot of fuel. And what we really want is to get this number, this end amount of fuel, right down as much as we can. Because what that means is we are running a car that is lighter for the duration of the race. So very simple, you just start plugging numbers into the starting fuel amount. So I'm just going to make a guess at 50 litres. Okay, let's try 50 litres. So we start the race with 50 litres, and then every time we come into the pits, we'll just fill it up to 50 litres. See what happens. We now need 4 stops to make the race: 26, 52, 78, and 104, which doesn't sound so good. And you can see straight away that it's going to take us like 10 minutes longer to get this race done. So that's not a great start. And also we're still finishing with quite a lot of fuel in the tank. So maybe there's something else we can do. So we can try maybe 60 litres or something like that. Okay, so again, 3 stops now. It's still not ideal. What you can do is you can keep on plugging numbers in and it will update just as quick as that. But what I've also done is a little fuel run optimizer, you might call it. And so that's here in this area. So what we got is an amount to step your fuel up by, equivalent of you putting 5 numbers in all in succession. But what it also does is it creates this little chart at the bottom here that helps you with your optimization. So it compares actually 2 different performance models, and it will say which is the best one to use, how long your race is going to be in this case, and on what basis of fuel. Okay, so if I put in 2, what it's going to do is it's going to step up from 60 litres. It's going to do 62 litres, 64 litres, 66 litres, 68 litres, and work out the best one from that option. So all I do is select 2, press run fuel sweep, and it's saying 60 litres is the best. So what we're trying to do here is to reduce the amount of time you spend just randomly plugging numbers in. There is a little bit of that still, but this does speed things up. So I'm going to go try 70 with a split of 2. Okay, now we're starting to get somewhere. So what you've got on this chart here is, if you look at the scenario 1, we're finishing the race with hardly any fuel. Still enough, our margin plus a little bit. It's taken us 2 stops. The race time is now 3 hours 14, so this is like way quicker. This is 10 minutes plus quicker than that other one we looked at. And what you can see in the sensitivity is that we've looked at 70 litres, 72, 74, 76 and 78. And it's come back here with 76 as being the optimum. And these big steps here are because we've saved a pit stop in effect. So that is our initial thing. So I think 76 litres is the way to go for this lap race. Let's say you've got a timed race. Very similar to what we did before. In this case, we've got a 2-hour race. If it's 2.5 hours, you put 2 hours, 30 minutes in here, for example. Let's do that. Okay, so we've got a 2-hour, 30-minute race. Again, we've got our 1 lap of fuel margin. Again, you can change it to whatever you want. And we're just going to start off with 90 litres, and we're going to start with the fast, dry performance model. It's already looking quite good, to be honest, here. So it might be that this is the best way to run our thing. So I'm actually going to just throttle back to not too much, actually. I'm going to try 86 litres. All right, and now, so we're going to need this last splash and dash at the end here. So you don't really want that. So I'm going to run that again. And look, yeah, we were pretty close straight off. 89 litres is what it's recommending that we fill it up for. And we only need 1 stop. And we're going to cross the line with hardly any fuel in. Now what we can do here is focus down to some of this more overwhelming stuff on the bottom here. These are all your kind of performance questions. So you might want to say, how much is that in fuel? So here we go, fuel remaining at the end. Got 2.8 laps left of fuel. So it's still lows compared to our safety margin of 1, which is about 5 litres with 4 minutes remaining. So that's a couple of laps, and that was about 3 kilos. So I would say, I hope you agree, that is a pretty optimum strategy. So we've looked at all these different options, and we've now got 2 race strategies that are really going to give us the fastest car we can get using the least amount of fuel possible. So as promised, running back a bit, how can all this be calculated? So here is the performance model. We've clicked to performance model, and this is the basis from which all those calculations are made. Now again, it looks overwhelming, but in actual fact, there's very little to add, and most of it's repeated. So you've really got 3 main questions to answer. So which track are you at? And that is literally a text box. You can put in whatever you want. You've got to put the length of the track in. Now, the length of the track is quite important because it works out the distance that you're traveling for amount of fuel. What I've included is this track database. And so they've got, I don't know how many, 100 and something number tracks. And you've got the length here in kilometers and miles, and you can just basically find your track and the layout that you're running, and it is likely to have that lap. So just go to that database and copy the number in. The next thing you need to configure is a bit about your car. So like, how big is your fuel tank? In our case, we've got a 90 litre fuel tank, which is quite big, but it's an endurance car, so that's normal. If you've got less, put your number in. And then the next thing we have here is dry fill to fuel time. Now this is your performance, this is your ability to fill your tank from 0 to 90 litres. And literally all you have to do is fill it up and time how long it takes you. We've done this a few times with a few teams, and it's about 30-35 seconds for what we were doing, so that's why I'm using it. The minimum fuel stop time. Now in some types of races, you have a minimum amount of time that you need to be stationary in the pits. In some ways this makes your life easier, so you don't have to do all the timing of the fuel fill. So if it's 60 seconds, for example, it's quite often a minute, that overrides the fuel fill time, and now we're just looking at your stop time. So you literally just come in, and every time you're stopped it's 60 seconds. So that makes things a bit easier for you. The next thing down here is the pit in and out loss time. So the car is losing time when it's driving through the pit lane. It's losing time when it's not moving, but it's also losing time coming off the main track, through the pits, and then exiting your pit box and getting back on to the track. So what you need to do is put in a figure for that. And this is track dependent. So some tracks you lose hardly anything, and other tracks you might lose quite a lot of time. The way to look at that is literally time yourself through the pits. Just simply come in, drive through the pits and drive out again. Typically, in my experience, it's about 30 seconds loss. So you can use that to give you a good start. And that's pretty much all you need to do for the pit stuff. And it works out your total pit stop time and your fill rate, assuming that's a competitive element for you. So the next thing, and this is the final thing you need to do, and then everything's set up, is your performance model for how much fuel your car is actually using when it's on track. And there's two things about this to consider. It's very simple to create, and number two, you can then use that at future tracks as well. Even if the track's a different type of track, you can still use this as a basis to get you going and get you on that front foot for your next meeting. So you've got 4 options, and you can call them what you want. I've called it fast dry, fuel save, wet and safety car, but you might be comparing tyres, you might be comparing aero setup, you might be comparing all sorts of different things, lift and coast strategies, whatever it is you want to do. And so basically you've got 4 blank canvases here for performance. So if you are a sim racer or you have a live telemetry system, some of this stuff is worked out for you. But what we're ultimately trying to get down to is how much fuel your car uses per lap, per mile, per second, or per minute. These are the results here. And the way in which I'm suggesting that you can do it, that's worked for me, is you go out in testing and you do a representative session of at least 10 laps. And you go out and you run that as fast as you would in the race. You take the amount of fuel that is used in that session, how many laps it was, for example 10 laps, and then you take the average lap time that you did in that session. Because your lap times are going to be all over the place. What we want is the average lap time for those 10 laps and then how much fuel you used. And that is all you need to do. If you can put that in, that gives you your first performance model. What's interesting is that look at that, you're completely overwhelmed with numbers now. Remember, there's 4 different things, they're all exactly the same. But what you get is these little tables, and these are really quite handy as well to have printed out next to you if you're on the pit wall or you're planning to do something different. Because literally it's thinking, how many litres, I've got 60 litres in the car, how many laps will that do? And how many minutes will that be? 68 minutes. And how many miles will that be? 29 miles. So whichever dimension of race you're thinking about, these little lookup tables can actually be really useful. And so what I've done, I've included 3, so you're not having to work out, if it's 30 laps, like how many litres is that? You just go down here, 30 laps, that's 54 litres. It's the same information repeated, but just with a different left-hand column, just to help you out. So you can go, I'm interested in minutes, right, it's here, I'm interested in laps, here, interested in litres, and there. And really, that is all there is to it. So you pull that back in, you choose the one you're running, and you optimise your laps, and you're good to go. So hope that was useful, and best of luck when you're next on track.